All right, next up is Jen Reiher. Jen Reiher is a web developer at Benevity, a mentor and sometimes instructor at Lighthouse Labs, and one of the founders of YYJ Tech Ladies and YYJ Tech. But in her previous life, she worked for 8 years doing radical social justice work in the nonprofit sector. Jen.
Hi, everyone. All right, cool. So as Chris said, before my life in tech, I worked in the nonprofit sphere doing inclusion work. And I worked there for a long time, and I went through this really long sort of change in how I saw the world around how to be a really good ally to people on the margins. So I want to share some of that with you today. So what do we mean about like other people, right? So we have these binaries in society where we kind of like separate groups out, and then we have all these stereotypes about them. And if they're not us, then we kind of believe that they may be true, right? So these are some things that I've learned along the way about how to change that way of thinking. The first little bit's going to be about sort of my internal journey around like what I had to change around how I thought and what I sort of perceived in like about how I behaved around things. So the first one was understanding that I was going to make mistakes often, and it was not so much about my intention in that moment, but how I handled it when people called it to my attention that I had made this accidental mistake. But to not that paralyze me, right? To make the space, to have the feedback, to give people the opportunity to say, even though it was really scary, that I had done something wrong, and let them help me to not make it again. I also had to learn that because I had largely been well included my entire life, I couldn't actually always tell when other people weren't being. And I just didn't have that, and I had to actually learn that, which was, I didn't expect that. You know, I had a women's studies degree in sociology. I should know how to do this, but I couldn't. And I had to learn that my offering advice based on what I had done was not actually helpful. In fact, it could actively be harmful because someone who had experienced a lot of exclusion, it wouldn't have that same experience that I did. And I still struggle with this one today because I get really excited and I get really passionate about social justice stuff, and sometimes I just don't know when to shut up and let other people talk. It's not my battle to fight sometimes, and I need to remember that. So I talked a little bit about how to know when exclusion is happening if you haven't lived it yourself and you haven't had that feeling. So here are some of the things that we actively did in my job to help the people that we worked for to have a little bit better experience. So I observed that it was really common that everyone I worked with is so aware all the time of how much they were being treated differently than the other people who were quote-unquote normal. And everyone felt this. And so there were little things that we tried to do around like modeling for other people what maybe was a more respectful way to interact with that person, choosing really careful language, and just generally trying to be thoughtful. It was a place to start, right? But because people had been so socially isolated and so physically isolated in some cases, they didn't necessarily have those unspoken rules about how to be in a space. Even a space like this would have been very challenging to participate in. So we spent a lot of time working with the groups that they wanted to be involved in to help them understand how to make an effort in order to include that person, even though it was actually sometimes really hard and uncomfortable to know even when to start. Unfortunately, sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes this group had been so incredibly marginalized they just had given up trying. Because why would I give a fuck about those people? They don't give a fuck about me, right? So it's not enough to just offer. Sometimes you have to actually make a change to the space to make sure that that person feels like they can belong, and that they are welcome to be there and know that they're not going to be judged. I also realized that well, apparently I talked fast there. Sometimes even when people are in situations, there can still be moments that cause them to feel uncomfortable. So I would always learn to watch for when people got really quiet when they weren't maybe quiet before, or got really emotional when they weren't before. And I learned that was actually probably a trigger of repeated anxiety. And I really had to stop power tripping in that moment and pull back and start to listen and hear what they needed in that moment in order to feel safe. And that was a huge challenge. One other pattern that was really surprisingly common was people would start to become experts in their label and go out and public speak. And this was really great, but what we recognized was that was the only time that they were being valued ever by their community was as an expert, as that person. So one strategy that we used was to identify other leadership opportunities that they were interested in and to help support them to have those as well, to make sure that there was more than just one aspect of value that they brought. Okay, so obviously this is not a cookie cutter set of solutions that we can use when we're having those moments when it's really hard to be an ally, but I hope that was useful, and if not, I found some really awesome Star Wars memes, and they will make us laugh.